This is a Hope 1032 podcast.
Hello, welcome to Undistracted. I'm your host, Laura Bennett, and this is the podcast where we learn from our guests how to get better at building our lives with intention around our passions, our purpose, and deal with some of the things that get in the way of that. Our guest today is filmmaker Andrew Erwin. Together with his brother John, Andrew has been a part of some of the biggest faith films of the last decade, from Jesus Revolution to I Still Believe and Ordinary Angels. His latest project, which is in Aussie cinemas March 5, is I Can Only Imagine 2, the sequel to the 2018 hit that followed the true story of Christian band MercyMe and the family trauma that lead singer Bart Millard was facing alongside their career success. In this conversation, Andrew explains why Gilmore Girls, This Is Us alumni Milo Ventimiglia had to be a part of the film. He touches on the failures of Christian filmmaking and why the cast want to go to space. Let's welcome Andrew to the show. Andrew, before you and John started the Kingdom Story production company, what was it that got you interested in making movies?
When we started, I was, a kid that grew up in the TV studio. My dad was in television, in news and journalism. And so I grew up around it. And so I was what we would call a studio rat. Like, we just were working behind the scenes. And it was just a hobby that my brother and I both started together. It kind of grew out of control. And then I went off to a small college right after that. And they had a summer camp for kids. And so they found out I had some film experience, and they said, would you be willing to make little short films for the campers to watch? And there is, nothing more honest than a crowd of 15 to 18-year-olds. And so we'd have about 500 of them a week, and we'd do these short films. And so the first one we did, we thought it was epic. It was a King Arthur, Knights of the Round Table kind of deal. And it was a 10-minute movie, and it ended on stage live with pyrotechnics and explosions. And we thought it was, something we were going to win awards for. And then we waited in the end, and it was silent in the room. And then this one young kid whose voice hadn't become deep yet was like, is that it? And we're like, and it so scarred me for life that to this day, I can't sit through one of my films in the theater, because I'm convinced this guy's going to come back as a 40-year-old man and just be like, is that it? But it's where we kind of, we learned what works with an audience, and we fell in love with the idea of storytelling. And so I didn't know how God could ever use that. And so they had a conference at this school, and at the end of it, they had, they said, does anybody want to become a missionary, Christian missionary? And so I went forward to kind of talk to people about it. And just one of the people that I met with had a lot of wisdom, and they said, Andy, is this what you want to do? And I was like, absolutely not. And he said, well, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I just feel like I have to, because in order to be a good Christian, I have to go do something big and important. And he said, what do you want to do? What do you have in your hand? And I said, well, all I have is a video camera, but I don't know how God could ever use that. And he just said, Andy, give God what's in your hand. Let him figure out how to use it. And so that was the beginnings for me of saying, okay, I don't know how this could ever be used, but I want to try. And so we kind of stumbled into, my brother and I, we made music videos for years and worked with a lot of bands and did a lot of documentary work. And then in about 2010, my brother was working behind the scenes on another film, and one of the filmmakers just challenged him, and, it's time for you and your brother to try to make the jump and try to do it. So this little tiny low budget film, no budget at all, but we decided to go out and try to do it. And faith filmmaking had just gotten started, and it was in its infancy. And we did this little film, and we put it out, low budget, self-financed, put it out in theaters. And doing faith film at that point was not popular. And when we put it out, we took a tremendous amount of criticism for it being a Christian film. And there was a very popular, well-known actor that reached out to us and invited us to breakfast. And we didn't know anybody in Hollywood, so it was a big deal for us. And we went out and met with him. And we said, we think we're going to get blacklisted because, it's just not popular to be a faith filmmaker right now. And he smiled and he said, there's thousands of us that would work with you in a heartbeat. And so that was gave us the courage to make the next one. And we made several films, but our breakout moment was I Can Only Imagine in 2018. And that was a little, independently financed movie that shouldn't have done what it did. And then it did almost $90 million at the box office. And it was just amazing to see God breathe on a moment for us that allowed us to find our voice and kind of answer that question of what's in your hand, give it to God, let him decide what to do with it. So that's been our journey, but we're really grateful for it.
Yeah, and it's not an easy industry to be in. As you say, there's those occasions where you can feel like what you're doing is not what's popular. It's not what's going to get you open doors. What was driving an appetite, though, for faith films, do you think, that allowed the timing of what you guys were doing to have that kind of opportunity that maybe other filmmakers haven't or wouldn't have been able to get at that point?
Yeah, there was a group of us that were all got in the game around the same time. And so we all had this desire to do it around the same time. And so Mel Gibson had done The Passion of the Christ in 2004. So there was a group of us that were like, why can't we do that? And so we all jumped in to something that we really didn't know how to do. We were learning on the fly. And, the idea of faith in cinema had atrophied. And it wasn't because anybody pushed us out. We kind of gave up our seat at the table. I mean, if you look at the history of faith and art, like they go hand in hand for 2,000 years. You look at every cathedral in Europe, or look at every painting from the Renaissance, or the first thing printed on the printing press was the Gutenberg Bible, and then you look at the history of cinema and the amazing films that have been made, in the history of cinema, from Ben-Hur to The Robe to the Ten Commandments. And then somewhere in the 1960s, we just said, you know what? As Christians, that's not where Christians belong. The cinema is somehow bad. And there was a period of time where it was really preached from a lot of churches that cinema was wrong. And so I think we lost our seat at the table because we got up and voluntarily walked away. So in 2004, when a group of us were like, hey, we want to do that, we were jumping into something that, we really didn't have a lot of history in for the past 3 or 4 decades. And we all struggled in trial and error. And I think there was a lot of cheesiness in that early days of struggling to find our voice. And I was part of that. But, I think over the past 5 to 8 years, the things that were considered cheesy of putting hope in the world has all of a sudden, in a world that has gone through some massive struggles, has become, there's this air of desperation of wanting hope. And so what was cheesy is now kind of rebellious and counterculture. It's punk rock. And so the tone shifted in the industry. And then on top of that, as the movies and the products got better and better, the faith audience all of a sudden started speaking out with their movie ticket and saying, these are the kind of things we want. And so it became very synergistic to create a moment. And it wasn't just, the first I Can Only Imagine. It was, moments like the Kendrick brothers with movies like War Room, and you had Dallas Jenkins now with The Chosen, and now my brother is off making House of David, which is amazing, with Amazon. And there's been all these products, Alejandro Monteverde and Sound of Freedom. There's been these moments where all these filmmakers that we started in proximity have all found their voice at the same time. And it is just an amazing moment to be a faith filmmaker. And, whereas we used to be able to clear out any dinner party in Hollywood by just saying, hey, we're the Christian filmmakers. Now the Hollywood executives are gravitating towards us and saying, how do we get more product? And I don't know how long that window lasts, but I'm tremendously grateful that we get to do that.
It's a remarkable thing. And I almost do think it's not really fair to say anymore that faith films are cheesy or that faith films are sort of subpar to all of these other ones, because yourself and some of those filmmakers you mentioned really are part of this new wave of filmmaking that is giving, I think, not just sort of the Christian filmmaker, but Christian ideas a lot more credit than maybe they've had at other times. And I will say, I Can Only Imagine 8 years ago really was one of the movies that I think began that wave. And something I've heard you say before is that the opening that these movies have had in the mainstream world is not because they've become more diluted or they're sort of diminishing the faith message, but they're resonating or they're more willing to go into the struggle. Why have you, as a filmmaker, been more open to communicating about struggles in faith now?
I think it's a million little things But I think there's been an appetite, especially since the first Imagine, for the audience to be willing to look at the fact that Christians are three-dimensional people as well. We feel and we struggle and we have flaws. And I think for years, I think as Christians, we were nervous because we wanted to be liked. And we thought to be liked, we needed to go straight to the hope that we had. And we went straight to the message. And so it became a bit of a sermon from beginning to end. But I think what that presents to the outside world is that's where the cheese is. It's not in the message, it's not in the boldness. It's about earning the right to be heard. And so, I always love, I don't know if they have this on your side of the world, but here there's a lot of ads for pharmaceuticals and like different pills ads. And they always have, while they're reading all the side effects of how the pills could go horribly wrong, they always have footage of people in the sunshine smiling and laughing and being happy. And it's like, it feels incongruent. And so I think a little bit in the early days, we did that as Christians, is we're just like, yeah, bad stuff happens, but look, we're all hopeful and everything's great. I think where it really got nuanced is when we were just like, no, Christians are human beings too. So what's the human struggle in the story? And True Stories allowed us to explore that honestly, to be able to say, yeah, this is where this person had flaws and struggled, and this is where they found the redemption. So when it earns that right to be heard, when it gets to the moment that preaches, it's deserved. And what I loved about the first I Can Only Imagine was it was very disciplined to wait for that moment, to the breakfast table scene between Arthur, played by Dennis Quaid, and John Michael Finley playing Bart, to where finally Arthur says, if God can forgive everybody else, why can't he forgive me? And in a cheesy Christian film, Bart would have said, absolutely, God can forgive you. Let me tell you how. But what Bart, being an abused kid, says is very authentically true. That's the first thing he would have felt was anger. And he says, God can forgive you. I can't. And he gets up and he walks out. But then he finds out his dad has cancer. And then he comes back and reconciles. And so earning that moment and allowing it to not be perfect, I think makes the redemption that much more authentic. And it just allowed us to go more bold with that. So earning the right to be heard. And it's not just us. I think Dallas Jenkins does it amazing on The Chosen. Like, I think earning the authentic human emotion, there's just a lot of people that are doing it right. And hopefully we're just part of perpetuating that.
I can definitely say that you are, because in I Can Only Imagine 2, there was one of those moments especially where I was holding my breath thinking, are you going to go down the cheesy line, or where is this going to go? When Bart is there with his son Sam, and in the story we learn that Sam has type 1 diabetes. It's going to be this lifelong thing. He has to have constant injections. And Sam asks Bart, what do you do with the pain? How do I kind of get through this? That's my rough summation of what he says. And I was waiting for Bart to go, well, you know what, son, we pray it through, or something like that. But that is not at all the answer that he gives. He essentially says that the way to get through pain is to share it, right? To be less alone in it, which was it was a really beautiful drop, I think, in a story that could have been cheesy, but just felt so real in that dynamic between parents and their kids and the struggle of being part of pain.
Yeah, absolutely. I loved your summation. It's very true. I think I Can Only Imagine too. I was really skeptical to go back because I didn't want to go back unless there was a reason. And then somebody told me the story of the song Even If, and Tim Timmons, this new character that Milo Ventimiglia plays, and kind of walked me through it, and it really moved me. But the question that hooked me in is my co-director in this, Brent McCorkle, said, what do you do if your happily ever after breaks? And I was like, I'm in 100%. Because I think so much of what we've sold in both cinema and in the church is there's this moment of nirvana we get to where our dreams come true and everything stops to be hard. And that's a false hope, because what we're longing for is heaven on earth, and that's not what this life is. This life is a series of struggles and hurts and disappointment and joy and happiness and hopefulness, and it's just, they're married together. So in this story, we were able to go a lot deeper with it, and it's a lot more nuanced because it's not tied in a neat little bow, but it gives you every bit the hope that the first movie does, but in an unexpected way. And so to earn that right to be heard. And then I think also what it gave me hope for was as a parent, because both I can only imagine one and two are about the father struggle. The first movie is the struggle with my father. This movie is the struggle as a father.
Mm.
And as a parent, it's just the hard thing is like, how do I give my kids something that was never truly modeled for me? And so my favorite scene is when Bart is in the hospital with his wife Shannon and his son, and Bart says, "Nobody trained me how to do this job. My dad died just when he was getting good at it."
Mm.
And he said, "I think that God's given my kid the wrong dad, like I'm the wrong one." And then Shannon turns to him and courageously says, "Millard, you're the only one. You're his father. You don't have to get it perfect. Fight for our son."
Mm.
And the thing I love the most in the audience response, and people go into this movie very skeptical because of the idea that it's going to be more of the same. And then when they go into it, it's like, it's not what I expected at all.
Mm.
And a lot of them come out of it saying they loved it more than the first one. But they had the test audiences. And one of the early test audiences, there was one woman in the focus group that was very opinionated. And she's like, "I love the movie. It was great. But I wish Bart would just get his act together as a dad. He's had 15 years to figure out how to be a good dad."
Mm.
And then it's quiet for an awkward 10 seconds. And then there's this one 45-year-old man sitting a few seats down from her. And he just kind of sheepishly raises his hand. And he says, "I don't want to argue, but that's exactly how I feel." And then every man in the audience was like, "Me too, me too, me too."
Mm.
And I just think giving parents courage that you're not going to get it perfect. It's okay for it to be messy, but just be present. And it's in the messiness and the vulnerability. And there was an article that came out today or yesterday in the Hollywood Reporter where they said that the Gen Z and Gen Alpha generation are desperately desiring to see depictions on the screen of authentic parenting, of parents that are good parents, that want to be good parents, particularly good fathers, not the macho fathers,
Wow.
but the ones that are flawed and are working on their flaws and are working on their mental health, but love being a dad and want to be a good dad.
Mm.
And that's what this movie presents. And I just want to start that conversation between parents and kids because it's just something that I think the world needs right now.
It's such an important conversation. And John Michael Finley said that in his view of this movie, it's very much about mental health. And you see that come up so often, and the ability to be able to talk about that. And it's not even what the entire movie is about, because you also have Tim Timmons' story. You have the little pieces of all of these other storylines that kind of come into play. But again, it's that humanity, I suppose, that's sort of loudest at the front of it. What was Bart's perspective on opening up even more of his life for other people to talk about, for other people to analyze in some kind of way?
It was exciting, because I think, so Brent McCorkle, my co-director that wrote the script, Brent really, the mental health aspect was really, really important to him, because I think especially as people of faith and as Christians, sometimes that's been considered in past generations more taboo. The idea of being able to ask for help from a mental health professional, from a counselor, from support groups. We've had a little bit of a mentality in generations past of just kind of stand up and do it on your own, or kind of pick yourself up by the bootstraps. And I think it's okay to ask for help. And in this one, that's why even in the movie, I don't make a cameo on screen, but my voice is the moderator in the support group, because I've been in those groups, and it just absolutely was life-changing to not feel alone anymore. And so when we went through it with Bart's maintained his friendship with me for years, and we've maintained a really close connection since the first movie, and spend a significant amount of time together, even when we're not making a movie. But I went to him and I said, in this one, I've got to ask you to step into an uncomfortable role. I said, you've got to step into being the opposition for your son at first. And so you're going to have to be vulnerable. You're going to have to look at what's underneath the surface of the struggle and be honest in the struggle. And at points, the audience is going to struggle with you until finally you come to terms with your son. And I said, but I got to know what makes you tick under the surface. And he let down the guard in a way that was the most courageous thing I've ever seen in film. And he let us go there of really understanding the humanity and his struggle as a father. He's like, I can shoulder that. That would be great. And it also gave a beautiful voice to his son, who's now, in his 20s. But Sam, it was really deeply emotional because, moments that really gave him a voice and allowed him to speak up for his experience. So it was an authentic father-son journey,
Hmm.
but it took a lot of courage for both of them to let us go there. And I was really, really proud of both of them.
It's pretty special as well that you did get Milo Ventimiglia on this film. He plays Tim Timmins, the songwriter. His story is really prominent. What is it about this script that Milo just had to be part of? Because I've heard that he essentially said, hey, I want to play this role. You have to have me involved.
Yeah, Milo was a treat, and I've been a big fan of his for years. I mean, he's always, talk about a guy that just continues to find new audiences to become, beloved by.
Yeah.
I'm not necessarily the Gilmore Girls demographic, but there's just such a huge following for that show.
Mm.
But then the show I found him on was Heroes. He was great on Heroes, and then now, This Is Us is the one that everybody remembers him for. He read the story, and what caught his attention was the authenticity of this new character, Tim Timmons. And Tim was the opening act for MercyMe and was kind of thrown on the tour as this kind of lovable clown, fun guy, life of the party. Everybody loved him. But he was carrying a secret, and that secret was that he had been given terminal cancer diagnosis and was given 5 years to live about 25 years ago. And so he just didn't know if each day would be his last. And so he kind of adopts this posture of radical gratitude. And he wakes up each day and writes an X on his wrist with a Sharpie marker, just being able to say, God woke me up for another day, and it's the day I wasn't promised, and I'm grateful for today. And that gratitude just permeates every bit of his life. And he's also been obsessed with this hymn, It Is Well With My Soul. And the It Is Well With My Soul storyline, it was amazing. Horatio Spafford was the writer of that hymn about 150 years ago. And he lost his house in the great fires of Chicago and in America. And so when he was trying to rebuild, he sent his family over to England on a boat. And on the way over, the boat sank and he lost his kids. And in the midst of all of that grief, wrote one of the most lasting songs of all time, It Is Well With My Soul. And so that captured Milo's attention. He was like, this story is just amazing. I want to portray it. In the midst of that, there was the fires that happened last year in California and that swept through the Palisades in California, wiped out a whole lot of houses. And Milo lost both of his home and his in-laws' home, and lost everything and all of his stuff. And we called him and said, Milo, do you want to, postpone, or do you want to drop out of the film? We want to do what's best for you. And he said, I've talked to my wife. I need to process this on camera. So when we were filming the movie about 2 months later in Nashville, Tennessee, there was a crowd of about 3,000 people when he told that story of Horatio Spafford. And when he told that this guy lost his entire home in the fire, it just hit somewhere personal for him. And the audience felt it. It was palpable. And watching that happen was just a chills moment that I'll never forget. And there wasn't a dry eye in the room. And so there's a really powerful authenticity to how he brought Tim to life. And it's because he had lived it and he needed it. And so I'm really proud of his courage of being vulnerable with his trauma and his pain, and finding the gratitude in it to kind of communicate to an audience. And it gives the audience tons of hope.
It does. And when we watch a movie like I Can Only Imagine 2, I mean, that scene is such a profound one. And I'm glad you shared that story, because it explains why it was so especially moving, even beyond just what was happening on screen. When we watch that, it impacts us so much. But for you as a filmmaker, when you've told this story, when you've told so many other faith-related stories, how does it affect you as the filmmaker? Because at one level, it's like you're at work, you're showing up at work every day, getting this sort of quote unquote job done. What has it done to your faith to be involved in this kind of storytelling?
I've fallen in love with, even beyond the what, I've fallen in love with the how of making movies, and just how we do the job. And just rather than it being my movie, allowing everybody to get their fingerprints and their soul into it. And it allows it to be these moments of discovery. And so with this one in particular, beyond anything that I've done before, this one, the how, changed me more than any other movie. Just the amount of love that went into every frame of this movie, and how this group of people that were exceptional brought this story to life, is something that I'll never forget for the rest of my life. And I think the audience, when you see it, especially in the cinema, on the big screen with a group of people, you'll feel it. And this movie, I dare people to see this movie and not fall in love with it. Like, it's one that holds up. And I know that initial skepticism of people saying, but it's a sequel. And I understand that. And that's okay. I guarantee you watch it and it will catch you off guard. And it might even be your favorite over the other movie. So I just had so many of those moments that on this one deeply affected me that I just sat back by the monitor in tears. And in particular, one of those moments was when we filmed the end of the movie. And so we filmed it at Red Rocks in Colorado here in the United States, one of the most sacred music venues I've ever been to. It's like God's cathedral. Somebody took the roof off for the stars. And it's a very hard venue to get a hold of. And so it took us a while to get a date that we could film there. And we finally got a date. And MercyMe, the band, opened the tickets for people to come. And so we had 8,500, like close to 9,000 people there.
Wow.
And you don't direct the crowd of 9,000 people. And we had only enough time to get only so many shots that night. And so we did the take with filming Even If. And John Michael Finley just fearlessly just belts that